Thank you, Lauren, and thanks again to Ambassador Statisboya for providing those remarks. I'd like to invite our first, Dipak Nacker. Yes, I'd like to invite him up to the podium, please. Dipak is a co-director and co-founder of Raising Voices in Uganda. And if some of you were at our Gender 360 Summit last year, you might recall that his wife, Lori Michau, was one of our key speakers. And so we're delighted to have someone back from Raising Voices who's here today to talk about the work that they are doing in Uganda on school-related gender-based violence. Dipak?
Thank you. Next year it'll be my daughter. So now, as previous speaker said, that today we're taking a deeper dive into the issue of gender-based violence and young people. And what I wanted to do in the 15 minutes of fame that I have right now is to talk a little bit about focusing on violence against children at school. Whatever your language is, whether it's violence against children or gender-based violence or discipline or corporal punishment, the underlying theme is the same, and young people experience a lot of that in schools. Violence against children in schools has been an old problem. It's been with us for a long time. It's been with us as long as the schools have been around. And so the question is that why haven't we figured it out? All this time this thing has been going on, and here we are. And later on in my presentation, I'll give you some numbers. But the issue is that why hasn't it been addressed? And in a room like this, I don't need to belabor the point about why we should address the violence against children, but why now, at this point in our history. My first point to you would be, and this is often presented as last point in a lot of strategic discussions as a clincher, but I think in our thinking, we must remember that it's a moral imperative to prevent violence against children, especially in schools. I think that people still continue to think in silos around whose problem it is. You know, educators worry about learning outcomes, health professionals worry about things like immunizing children and fixing them once the damage has happened. Planners don't even worry about children. And so whose problem is it? Who owns this problem? It's people like us that need to own this problem. And that's why now is the time to do it. But beyond that, there are great opportunities at this particular moment. Given the success of the universal access policy to schools, according to UNESCO, more than 1 billion children are enrolled in schools. Think of the difference that we could make in the lives of those children if we were to influence how they experience schools. Because schools are places that are publicly funded, we have an opportunity there to influence and pull levers that influence what happens in those schools at policy level. So there again is another entry point where now is the time that we could pull some of those levers. But beyond all of this, school is a place that gives us a comprehensive opportunity to define ourselves in terms of who we are going to be in this world. It's a place where we learn the difference between right and wrong, not because teachers engage in teaching wisdom, but children observe. That's when they learn that, you know, what happens if I steal that pencil? What happens if I turn up late? What happens if I tease my classmate? What happens if I look at that girl differently compared to that boy? All those things we learn at school and in places like school. And so there's a particular opportunity at this particular moment to influence how the raw material of that appears in the minds of 1 billion young people. Think about that opportunity. Yeah. And why haven't we done it so far, if that is the opportunity? Yeah. The problem continues, and it's not like the problem is small. You know? UNICEF has just recently published a nice synthesis of what's happening around the issue of violence. More than a decade ago, the Secretary General's special report on violence against children also synthesized information. All of it, as well as a lot more scholarship, is pointing to the direction that children experience a lot of violence in their lives, and they experience a lot of that in schools. In our own study in Uganda, we conducted a randomized trial between 2012 and 2014. Let me give you just some couple of numbers so that you understand what I'm talking about. More than 90% of children said they had experienced physical violence from a teacher in their school. More than 50% of children said they had experienced it last week, which essentially means that everybody's experienced it on a fairly regular basis. Almost 8% of children, they said they have experienced severe violence at school. By severe, I mean punching, beating, something that leaves injury in a child beyond that incident, often having to need medical care as a result. 8% of children. Think about that. The issue is something that is big and it has profound influence in terms of how children experience the environment of school. So that given the numbers, given compelling reasons that we have, why is it, I circle back to my question that I started with, why is it that we haven't done anything about it in any meaningful way? Is it because people who came before us didn't care about this issue? Is it because people who came before us are not as smart as us? Meeting some people in this room, maybe that second hypothesis, that self-serving hypothesis might have some credibility, but I don't think so. Yeah. I think that in important ways, this problem is really complex. It's not simple. It's not amenable to simple solutions. It's not amenable to simple solutions because we can't think of violence as just an incident. A lot of the framing of solutions has emerged from framing violence as an incident. That there is corporal punishment against a child, we should train teachers not to use corporal punishment. The parent beats a child in certain circumstances, we should build parental skills. And all those are important interventions. But we have to frame violence as a context of a child's life rather than an event in a child's life. And by context, I mean that when a child experiences an incident of violence, he or she doesn't just walk away from it with that incident. They walk away from a lot of other things that they plug into the equation of their life. And they learn a lot more things from that incident. And it's all those things that we need to address. And that's what makes it complex. It makes it complex because that means we have to have short-term strategies and long-term strategies. It means we have to join the dots of the silos that we were just talking about a minute ago. It means that we have to think about holistic responses rather than kind of piecemeal responses that sometimes happens. We have also not had evidence-based solutions. So people have been trying out things here and there, but we haven't been measuring the impact of what we're doing in a systematic way. So it's really hard for planners and for people who are investing in these issues to make decisions in terms of where to invest money. We've also had years and years of violence against children being normalized. It's just a normal way of relating with children. Adults have a really difficult time when they find themselves in the company of children not to start controlling them. Yeah? And controlling is our way of interacting with children and being with children. And school is almost a place where that is exacerbated because large numbers of children. And because of this environment, we have become acculturated to have low expectations, at least in the part of the world that I work in. So children don't have that many expectations from schools that they go to. Even teachers don't have that many expectations of children that they're teaching. And so we are kind of caught up in a cycle where it's self-referencing cycle, and then we move on. So when we were thinking of doing some work on the issue of violence against children in schools, that's the analysis we started off with. And we asked ourselves, what do we need to do if this is the situation that we're encountering? And what we ended up doing is, the first thing is that we started talking with large numbers of children. We talked with more than 1,400 children, 1,100 adults. We experimented in 6 schools. We experimented with advisors of teachers and students. And the fundamental thing that kept coming again and again is that we need to change how we frame the issue of violence against children, as I was talking about earlier. That at a retail level, that means on a day-to-day transaction level, what children were saying to us is that it's how I experience power flowing through interpersonal relationships. And most of what we were seeing in schools is that adults exercising power over children, controlling them and then telling them what to do. And there is some role for that. I'm not saying that adults don't have a role in guiding children. But what we realized and what we heard from children is that we needed to expand the repertoire of how power flows in relationships. So it's not just about power over, but power with, power to, and most importantly, power within a child, in terms of how we inspire all those things. And those are complicated things to program around, to develop activities around. In 2006, 2007 is when we started iterating this program. And we developed a 6-step process and more than about 70 activities that schools can get into. And that's what we've been experimenting with in Uganda. It's now in about 600 schools. In 2012, we evaluated it through a randomized trial conducted by London School and Makerere University. And the results were very encouraging, that when you try in a very careful way to try to influence the type of relationship teachers have with students, when you try to influence how schools create opportunity for young people to participate and create their voice and create their sense of self, and when you help schools create a governance that is accountable to all the stakeholders, then you start seeing some change, and you start seeing some change in a relatively short space of time. In 18 months, which is what our intervention that was evaluated, we saw that violence from teachers to students went down by 42%. 42%. In terms of teachers and the options that they exercised on how should they respond to a child, chose 50% of the time, fewer times, to choose violent response instead of actually a different response. Peer-to-peer violence went down, and children's own engagement with the school, how they felt they belonged with their school, their sense of identity went up. So that's what is possible if we change how we frame the issue of violence against children. And I can talk about it for the rest of the day, but we don't have time. But what I would like to do is leave you with a short 3-minute film where a child, a young girl, is talking about when ideas like these come to their school, what does that feel like? What does that look like? Thank you.
Read this.
A right to education. A right to have a name.
Clap for yourselves. The Uganda.
Our social studies teacher is called Teacher Francis. He has got something special about him than other teachers. He explains well, he's a kind teacher and he's lovely. For him, Every time he comes in class, children are more active. In our class, if we have problems and we've not understood about what he has taught, we are free to go and ask him what we've not understood.
What is urban migration now?
At home, my favorite thing to do is doing housework mostly. I like doing housework because it makes you practice your future. At my brother's school, sometimes they beat the children. When they do wrong, they beat them. One day he came back from school, then he said, "I tell you, Edith, the teacher came and slapped me." I felt bad because for us at our school, we are not usually beaten, so it made me feel bad like I'm the one whom they've beaten. I think when children are beaten a lot in a school, it affects their learning. All the time they be thinking of caning. If a child is scared of the teacher, the child cannot ask questions, the child cannot perform well in class, the child could not be settled. If you abuse me, it will remain on my heart until even I die. If they beat me, let me also be rude and I start beating. They would think my parents don't love me, they run away from their homes. At school, I have a best friend called Chirabo Stacia and another one is called Ikunda Karen. Ikunda is from Rwanda. Even though we speak different languages, we have a relationship. They know good friendship. Because our teachers are loving, they teach good. Coming to school, I feel so good.